Bilateral Monopoly. This occurs when a monopoly buyer of labour faces a monopoly seller, a monopolist versus a union. The outcome here depends on bargaining strength of each side. Differences in individual earnings depends on the ability and skills of the individual. The greater an individual's skill, the more he or she is likely to earn. If they are more trained or have achieved higher qualifications, for example. Non-monetary characteristics of a job. People may have to be paid more to do a dangerous job. Age. Earnings tend to increase with age up to a point and then decline. Gender and race. Women and non-whites tend to earn less. This could be because of discrimination. Location. Wages vary across the country and between countries. Demand for the individual. A less or more well-known personality may earn more or less. We now come to something which in the UK is a controversial topic, and that is the topic of a minimum wage. A minimum wage above equilibrium creates excess supply. The impact of a minimum wage is greater when demand and supply for labour are elastic. Clearly you can see the amount of labour shift, the amount of wage shift proportionately from L1 to L2 is much greater with the more elastic supply and the more elastic demand, creating a significantly more sizable excess supply. The minimum wage aims to help low paid, may give more incentive to work, may increase unemployment, may deter foreign investment, may increase wage demands from other employees wanting to keep the differential with the lowest paid. Effect of a minimum wage depends on how far above equilibrium the minimum wage is set, if at all, elasticity of demand of labour, and the increase in wages might increase demand for goods and services for labour, increasing employment, or increase labour morale and productivity. Government intervention in labour markets. Legislation exists to protect employees, e.g. they are entitled to notice the redundancy pay if they have been with a firm for over a year, have the right to join a trade union, have the right not to be unfairly dismissed, have the right not to be discriminated against on grounds of gender or ethnic origin. Also, Health and Safety at Work Act puts obligations on the employer to protect staff. Other regulations include national minimum wage limitations on how low wages can go, introduced in the UK in 1999. Transfer earnings is the amount that a factor of production must earn to keep it in the present usage in the long run. Economic rent is the payment over and above transfer earnings. Quasi-rent occurs if we imagine a machine with only one use being purchased. Once bought, all its earnings are economic rent, assuming it has no alternative use. Over time, it will depreciate and will not be replaced unless it earns a satisfactory return. Some of its earnings are now transfer earnings. It does not make enough. If it does not make enough, a new machine will be bought. And that's represented on the right there on the diagram for you, where you've got the wages market on the left and the quantity of a factor on the right and the top, and at the bottom you've got the quantity of a factor on the left and the quantity of a factor on the right as well. Income and wealth. Income is a flow, money that an individual earns in a year. Wealth is a stock concept, the total value of an individual's assets at a moment in time. The two can be linked. With more income, more wealth can be acquired, which can generate more income. Sources of income. Individuals may earn an income from different sources, including earned income from employment, unearned income, which is income earned from wealth, dividends from shares, interest from savings, transfer payments, for example, pensions from the government. Why do incomes differ? Incomes depend on demand. This will depend on the marginal revenue product for an individual. This in turn will depend on the individual's skills, his or her training, the level of technology, the amount of capital and the individual's experience. Supply conditions in the labour market. Bargaining power, for example trade unions. Government policy, wages in the public sector and minimum wage legislation. Direct taxation and benefits policy. Wealth, if an individual owns various properties, these will generate income through rent. Discrimination on gender or ethnic origin or age. The 2007 annual survey for hours and earnings, the ASHE, shows median earnings for full-time male employees was £498 per week in April 2007. For women, the median was £394. The top 10% of the earnings distribution earn more than £906 per week. while the bottom 10% earn less than 252. The occupations with the highest earnings in 2007 were health professionals, followed by corporate managers and science and technology professionals. The lowest paid of all full-time employees were sales occupation. Wealth. Wealth may be inherited, may be acquired with earnings. Wealth in the UK is unevenly distributed. Personal wealth can be in many forms of assets such as cars, savings, household items. The most significant form of personal wealth is ownership of housing. Marketable wealth, assets which can be bought or sold, such as housing. Non-marketable wealth cannot be transferred, such as pensions rights. These belong to an individual and cannot be sold on. Taxes to reduce wealth inequality include inheritance tax, capital transfer tax, wealth tax. Equality and equity or fairness. In a market economy, individuals receive different incomes given different supply and demand conditions. Rewards will vary. If employees have rare skills that are limited in supply and highly demanded, their earnings will be higher than someone who is in pursuit of a career with a high supply and low demand. Similarly, individuals own assets, cars, houses, land and so on. The value of these depends on the supply and demand as well. As a result of supply and demand, the economy will contain poor and rich people. There will be inequality. The degree of income inequality is measured by the Lorenz curve or Gini coefficient. Now, the Lorenz curve and Gini coefficient can be used in microeconomics, but to be perfectly honest, it's not something which we will be discussing here, as it's beyond the scope of the level which we're discussing. It is something which is used quite widely in macroeconomics. People may think inequality is unfair. There is a lack of equity. This does not mean it is necessarily inefficient. A fair distribution which involves a normative decision about what is fair, may lead to inefficiency. Taxing high-income earners to make incomes more equal may remove the incentive to compete or succeed. Horizontal equity occurs when there is identical treatment of people who are in the same situation, for example, no discrimination against people on the basis of race or gender. Horizontal equity may be measured by considering the things such as the earnings of women compared to men, or earnings in one region compared to another. Vertical equity, the different treatment of people with different characteristics to promote greater equity, redistributing from rich to poor. In the case of taxation, this means taxing the rich more in proportion to their earnings. Equity versus efficiency. The free market leads an uneven distribution of income. Governments intervene because society regards this distribution as unacceptable. However, while subsidies to the poor and higher taxes on the rich may be regarded as socially desirable, they are interfering with the market mechanism and so are actually creating inefficiency. On the other hand, given that inefficiencies exist within a market, for example monopolies or externalities, intervention may actually improve efficiency overall, one efficiency offsetting another. This is the theory of second best. Poverty. Poverty is a concept which can be expressed in two ways. Firstly, absolute poverty occurs when human beings cannot consume sufficient necessities to maintain life. People are malnourished or homeless. Relative poverty means that some people are poor in relation to others. This does not necessarily mean they are poor in absolute terms. The desirability of income distribution in the UK. The present distribution of income may be regarded as by some as undesirable because absolute poverty exists. Some people are sleeping on the streets. Relative poverty exists. The gap between the rich and poor may be viewed as too wide. Horizontal inequality exists. The differences between the earnings of men and women exist significantly. Government and redistribution of income. Government redistributes income via spending on social security benefits and pensions, on the provision of goods and services, for example, health, education and housing. Taxation, progressive income taxes. Legislation, minimum wage legislation and equal pay legislation. Training, this may improve wages in the long term. That's the end of this session. Thank you very much for taking part. I'd like to conclude with thanking you again because it's actually the end of the course. We've covered a significant amount of material. Thank you for bearing with me. I hope to hear from you again soon. Please leave a review if you'd like to about the course. Any questions, please leave a question and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible. Thank you very much for taking part in the course. Goodbye.